This smartphone carries a big promise. A promise that is made by one Swedish name on the back, Hasselblad. But should the cooperation with the Swedish camera icon really sell you on the OnePlus 9 Pro? Let's find out. From the front, it's basically impossible to tell this phone apart from its predecessor, or basically any other phone for that matter. Of course, with no bezels to speak of, there isn't really much you can do. Where I really think OnePlus took a step backwards is with the rest of the design. Don't get me wrong, I do like the matte black version I have here, I just wish there were also other more vibrant matte color options available like we had in the past. While this matte black version might look like it's textured, like the sandstone finish on the OnePlus One, that is not the case by the way. The back of this black 9 Pro is completely smooth. I also think that the centered camera placement on past OnePlus phones made them a bit more unique. Now we have a big square in the top corner like virtually every other phone. That said, at least it doesn't stick out as much as it did on the 8 Pro. Apart from this, it's back to the familiar story. Handy alert slider, great stereo speakers, and the whole thing is IP68 water resistant. I do think though that the vibration motor, while feeling very premium, isn't really that strong, so if you put the phone on vibrate, you might miss some calls. The OLED screen of the 9 Pro is stellar. Of course it is, I don't think you really expected anything else. OnePlus does say that peak brightness is a bit higher than the 8 Pro, but I honestly don't think that's noticeable. This screen does get really bright, but since brightness scales logarithmically, that means that going from 100 to 200 nits is as big of a jump as going from 1000 to 2000 nits, we really are at the point of diminishing returns now. What is new is that the 1440p 120Hz display is now an LTPO panel. That means that it can dynamically adjust its refresh rate to match what is displayed on the screen. When you're playing a game or scrolling, it uses the full 120Hz, but when watching a video it ramps down to 24Hz. This should of course help with battery life, but unfortunately that doesn't really seem to materialize. I'll get back to that a bit later. The curve on the screen is even more subtle now, and I honestly don't mind it in terms of usability. But of course things can get quite annoying and costly once you drop it and the screen breaks. The phone of course rocks the state-of-the-art Snapdragon 888 chip. Not that that really matters, because high-end smartphone chips have been really fast enough for a while now. That especially also goes for chips in a OnePlus phone, so I think I can make this pretty quick. What the speed these new chips bring really is important for are more camera and video recording features and things like that. The standard things like scrolling through social media aren't really impacted by faster chips anymore in my opinion. That said, OnePlus phones do historically have very optimized software, and of course that's no different here. No hiccups, no wait times, everything just works super smoothly. And since they apparently still have to write that on the box as if it wouldn't be obvious at this point, the 9 Pro also has 5G support. The fingerprint sensor is still very good as well. What I don't like is that OnePlus still refuses to include an eSIM on their phones. OnePlus's software is still one of the main selling points of their phones, as it stays close to Google's conception of Android with not too many in-your-face alterations. And since the 8T, we thankfully also get an always-on display. While they have changed it a bit in the past, I still think the software skin is the main way in which OnePlus differentiates itself from other Chinese manufacturers that make phones with basically the same hardware but less sleek and clean software. Of course, when it comes to the home screen, this phone is pretty heavily customized by me. If you want to know what is on here and how to get a similar look on your own phone, I recently made a tutorial on that, which you can check out in the cards. The camera is by far the feature OnePlus advertised the most on the 9 Pro. Which I guess also makes sense, given what I just said about the rest of the phone really not having changed that much. The two big lenses on the back really are great, and even better than what we had on the OnePlus 8 Pro. And that phone already had a camera that was way better than its predecessors. I think the most important point is that the 48MP main camera and the 50MP ultrawide produce photos that are almost indistinguishable in terms of quality. That is something that you just don't see normally. On most phones, the wide angle is significantly less capable than the main camera, and also often produces pictures with a way different color temperature and profile. That really isn't the case here, except for maybe slightly less dynamic range when the wide angle moves the sun into the shot. But how do the pictures look? Definitely in line with other high-end phones. Unbelievably sharp, great dynamic range that doesn't crush shadows even when shooting directly into the sun, and very natural colors. That last point is something I find very pleasant, but if you prefer a more saturated look, you might need to turn that up in editing. Still though, I don't think it makes things like food look dull. Because of the large sensor, you also have a very good natural depth of field, but not so much so that it becomes annoying. What I do find annoying though is the automatically activated macro mode, which does produce worse results than if you just turn it off in my opinion. The telephoto camera is significantly weaker than the other two, but it does still profit from the same sharp and naturally colored look and is thus quite usable. I also think that 3x is a good sweet spot for getting closer, but not too close. Compared to the main one, the selfie camera is honestly a bit sad, because it doesn't have the same good color reproduction. Night mode has already been quite good on OnePlus phones in the past, but this is another step above. The level of detail it preserves is on a level with the Pixel phone, but without making the photos unnaturally bright. And the night mode also profits from the great ultra-wide camera. Video recording is possible at 8K or, which is much more useful, at 4K at 120 FPS. If you want that in a standalone camera, you have to pay a couple of €1,000. Stabilization is also great. OnePlus phones are definitely among the best Android phones for video recording. I'm overall very happy with the camera quality, also compared to something like an iPhone 12. That said, I don't think that the cooperation with Hasselblad necessarily made it any better than other high-end phones without such branding. Except for the ultra-wide, of course. Which pictures you like best has more and more become a question of preference and not objective quality. Battery life on the 9 Pro was probably the biggest letdown in my time using it so far. I already noticed that during the days after taking it out of the box, and it hasn't gotten better since. In day-to-day use, it's not even really that bad. It's not that great either, but it should get you through the day. You can expect about 4.5 hours of screen on time on average. Of course, that does get better when you turn the screen down to 1080p, but at that point you could probably also just buy a OnePlus 9 instead. Where the battery life really breaks down is when using the camera. On a city sightseeing trip I did recently, I managed to kill the battery from almost completely full in just a couple of hours. And that is with 3 hours of screen on time and 30 minutes of total camera usage. While this is of course something you don't do every day, it's still important to recognize that this new camera system has an impact on battery life that basically forces you to take a power bank and charge in the middle of the day if you actually use it. That really doesn't make it a whole lot better than an iPhone 12 mini, a phone whose battery life some people would classify as atrocious. So especially given that this is a way bigger phone with a way bigger battery, I think that's a bit disappointing. Fortunately, the phone charges really fast to somewhat make up for this. In just 10 minutes of charging, you can get a third of your battery back, which is really convenient when you're in a hurry and the phone is empty. Which, as I said, isn't out of the question here. The fact that it's full in under half an hour also means that it's often at 100% before you're done with getting ready in the morning. Wireless charging at 50 watts isn't quite as fast, but even more convenient. If you have a OnePlus 8 Pro or probably even 7 Pro, this phone really isn't worth the upgrade for you. Not a whole lot has really changed except for the usual small tweaks, especially compared to its direct predecessor. That doesn't mean that it's a boring phone, however. The camera upgrade is really substantial and now firmly secures OnePlus's place among the other top dogs. And the very natural colors and great ultra-wide angle in some ways even have it pull ahead. It's just sad that this camera upgrade really digs into the battery life of the phone, which I would classify as pretty bad for this phone size. But if you can live with that, you get a flagship phone that, while still expensive, gives you exceptional value compared to other even more expensive phones. If you enjoyed this video, you know which buttons to press, and don't forget to press that follow button on Twitter. I'm Brian, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.